Thank you, Wally and Ginger. Love you. Let us say just a few words by way of sort of introduction to this, to sort of clarify a couple things. First, let me give a thought or two about divine healing itself. And this is no time to preach a sermon on it. The Lord doesn't heal everybody. I think all of us are aware of that. Contrary to what you may have heard, He just doesn't do it. Because if He did, we'd never get to heaven and never leave this world. We'd all be stuck here. This is not the day when Jesus walked on earth. This is a different day. You're not Jesus, and I'm not either. But in our dispensation, in this day, I understand scripturally, as I study the Bible, that He chooses to heal a few or perform a miracle of one kind or another at a pivotal point in time in their life and the lives of others, if it's somebody can trust to keep it sacred and right and use it to touch other lives. Which reminds me, I would not be like those lepers who went away and so soon forgot what He did. Now let me clear the air a little bit about something else. What we're doing this afternoon is very sacred to us. We have not profiteered from it or used it for personal gain. We've tried to keep it in the spiritual divine frame that was given to us in. We will not touch it up or add to it, but only tell it to you like it was, the best we know. I think there are probably three reasons why I'm doing this. In the first place, I think I'm doing it because the Lord wants us to, first of all. I think if God does something for us, whatever it is, then I think we ought to be thrilled about it and be glad to tell what He has done. Secondly, I'm doing it because the head of the heart team that did the surgery, a very famous heart surgeon, asked us to commit ourselves to Him, that every place we went, as long as we lived, we would tell folk that God had raised us from the dead. And I promised Him that I would. And the third reason I guess I'm doing is because out of my own heart of happiness and gratitude, I cannot keep from telling about it. I just cannot. And I trust that God will take this today and will touch your heart with it. I'm a preacher of the gospel. My choice would always be to just take the word and preach from it. And I don't understand all that happened to us. I don't know why at this point in our life God chose to do this. But I do know that, as I was sharing with your DS, that the Lord has touched thousands of lives with this that I would not have touched in the regular course of the ministry. I was sharing with Brother Hancock that James Dobson on Focus on the Family will be running this for a few weeks in the near future, over 1,200 and something stations. These are people that I would not have touched if this had not happened. And I appreciate the Lord trusting us to use this part in our life to be able to touch other lives. I don't have time this afternoon to tell you everything. If I did, we'd be here till far in the night, and you'd be very unhappy, and I'd be back where I was when this story all began. But what I'm going to do is try to just lift out a few things that are sort of significant and try to share with you the high points of what happened. It was 2 years ago, just a few days ago, when it all took place. We were preaching in the last meeting prior to angioplasty surgery. We had already had all the tests. They had already done all the tests, discovered the artery was blocked and all that goes with that. And now we were going to preach the last time before angioplasty. The pastor called and asked me if I'd like to call it off. He knew the situation. I said, no. I said, I want to come and preach. He said, okay, let's don't do the whole week then. Why don't you fly in on Friday and we'll have a weekend? And I said, well, who knows what might happen. And just in case, I'd like to preach again. So I went to his church. On Friday night, the night that I arrived, we had a beautiful service. It was there, like it's been here all week at camp meeting. The sense of a divine presence beyond the preacher and beyond the building, a sense that we were in God's presence. That night, I was in the third heaven. To this moment, I can't even tell you what my text or subject was that night, but I preached beyond myself. It'd be nice if we could do that all the time, but you can't. When I finally realized where I was back in church again, the altar was filled and the front pews were filled. And after service, the pastor said to me, he said, "Bob, there's something I want to share with you." He said, "While you were preaching tonight," he said, "I've never had an experience like this in my life." And he said, "You know, I'm not into all kind of visions and crazy stuff." And he said, "My feet are on the ground." And he said, "We knew each other in school, and you know me well." But he said, "While you were preaching tonight," he said, "God just blotted everything out and hid everything from me. I couldn't even see a person sitting near me, no one. And all I saw was some little short fella I'd never seen, had your heart in his hand, trying to make it beat, and it wouldn't. And he turned to me and said, 'It's no use,' and left you for dead." And then he said, Jesus came in dressed in white and smiled at me so beautifully and went over and picked your heart up and shook it and started beating and laid it back in you. And then I came back to church. And all that reminded me this afternoon, it may seem like sometime in your life that Jesus is not going to get there. But he always arrives. The devil will tell you he'll be late, but as sure as you're in this tabernacle this afternoon, Jesus will always arrive when you need him most, and he'll not fail to come. I do not know why during all this time the Lord chose to show his hands to so many people. And again, I don't have time for all of this either this afternoon, just a little bit. But during this time, he so beautifully revealed his hands. My neighbor, who's such a fantastic Christian, came to my house after we had gotten home, and he said, "Bob, the night at the district assembly," let me just stop here and inject a word. My own district was so good to me during these days. Someone has said that an evangelist is one that's well liked with a briefcase 100 miles from home. But that is not our case. And our own district was so good to us. And the district assembly following this, they had one entire service at the assembly and called it the Bob Hoots service, and brought my wife and me to the platform and honored us with an entire service during the assembly and celebrated the fact that we were still alive. But anyway, he said, "Bob, when the news came at the assembly, and they'd called in, the doctors had said that they saw no way you could live through the night. He said, we closed down the assembly and went to prayer for you." And he said, those several hundred people prayed like I'd never seen people pray in my life. And during the course of that prayer, he said the Lord just blotted it all out. And we couldn't see anything or anybody. And all I saw was a beautiful pair of hands. And they came and stood in front of my face. I never knew before that just a pair of hands could mean so much. And he said, "A peace that cannot be put in words enshrouded my soul and engulfed my inner being." And when it was all over and I came back to the service and realized where I was, I said to my wife, "It's going to be all right. I just saw the Lord's hands, and he has charge. I don't know whether Bob will live here or live there, but he's in the Lord's hands, and it's all right, and I feel good about it. Once my soul was astray from the heavenly way, and vile and wretched as could be, when the Savior in love gave me peace from above, and he reached out his hands for me." When he reached out his hands for me, when he reached way down for me, I was lost and undone, without God or his Son. When he reached down his hands for me, those hands paint the flowers. They put leaves in the trees. At his whisper, birds start singing. When my heart needs melody, they're the hands of our Lord. We went in for angioplasty surgery. The heart doctor plus the doctor that teaches this at the U of L Medical School would do the work. And the man who is the professor for this at the medical school came to our room and spent an hour with us prior to the surgery and explained to us that it's very simple and very short. Famous last words. He said 98% is successful. Only 2% do we have problems with. And they're not with cases like you. You're younger, you've never smoked, you have the heart of a 21-year-old man. And he said we just carefully thread through the heart, through the artery, and we balloon the artery. You'll be out of the hospital within 2 days and on the road again within a week at the longest. But he said, I do want to explain to you and be up front with you. If it goes wrong, it can be bad news. We have a team of standby surgeons, legally, medically, that's required. And he said they're on standby just in case. But he said, we don't anticipate any problem. But even in spite of the standby team, it can still be bad news. And we want you to understand that. And we did, and we felt very good about it. And we do to this hour. I can't prove this, but I will go to heaven believing that God had planned to take me home. And this was his way he's going to do it. And the people prayed. And the Lord, in his sense of humor, said, you don't know what you're asking for, but if you insist, there he is. You're going to have him a while longer. We were having the angioplasty done, and I was picking at the doctor because they don't knock you out. You're very alert, more than I am now, ever will be again. And I was picking at the doctor, and I said, hey, Mar, you about done with me, man? I said, a few more days, you won't see me anymore. And I said, I know you'll be glad. He said, Mr. Hoots, in spite of all the jokes you've pulled on me, you're my favorite customer. And he said, I'm going to miss you so much. He no more than got the words out of his mouth when the pain grabbed me. And before he told me, I already knew that the heart was stopping. He turned to me and he said, I'm sorry, Mr. Hoots, it's gone wrong. And then they opened the door quickly, and all this team of heart surgeons rushed out of the room that joined us. And it was like they were cutting my arms off a little bit at a time, and my heart was stopping, and I was graduating. Now, bear with me. You may say you mean dying. No, I mean graduating. For 2 years now, I've never made reference to death except in the case of the sinner. Please, my brethren, don't talk about Christians dying. Christians don't die. I have been there. We graduate. It is not the end. It is the beginning. Oh, grave, oh, death, where is thy sting? And where is thy victory? Glory to God. The head of the heart team took charge at this point, and these were in the angioplasty just stepped back out of the way, and the new fellow we had never met or hadn't planned to meet, he spoke quickly, and he said, would everybody hurry? He said, seconds are vital. And he said, if his family's in the building, get him quickly. I wanted to see him while he's still conscious. My wife said she came in, and I was conscious, but I can't remember it at all. I started to pray. This is not the natural thing at the critical moment in your life. Don't we all do that? That's natural. Not just for those that aren't ready, but it's natural for those who are. When everything goes wrong, we pray, don't we? And so when I realized I was graduating and going home, I had to pray. And I realized I was going fast because the heart was already stopping. And so I just put it very briefly. And I said, Jesus, I have loved you for a long time. And I've always belonged to you, and I belong to you now. And I don't want to tell you that I would butt in and make a choice in the matter. But if you want to take me, or if you want to leave me, whatever you want to do will be fine with me. And then I was on my way to heaven. I've been asked by so many to try to describe it. How in the world do you put it in an earthly framework? How do you describe it in the light of earthly thinking to mortal men? How can you tell what it's like going into heaven when we don't have our glorified bodies and glorified minds? When we think of in terms of sunset and sunrise and sickness and the grave, how can you describe to folk what it's like? When we think of Jesus as a man that's been painted by somebody that has a beard that hangs on the wall somewhere, how can you describe to them beyond all they've been taught what it's really like? I tell you, there is no description. If you take every song that's ever been sung, every piece of poetry that's ever been written, every oratorical piece that has ever been spoken, if you take it all, even the marvel of natures and the fondest dreams, and put it all together and multiply it 10 million times 10 million, it would not be a sand on the beach compared to what it's like to be going into heaven. I was holding the hand of this one that had loved me so long. He found me when I was a lamb, and as a sheep, he had walked with me and carried me across the years. And now we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and I was not afraid. I had a friend that was where you were, and they swam this dark river and crawled through a dark tunnel. I don't know where they were, but they weren't at the same spot where I was. Because the place where I was, there was no dark, wide river to have to swim. There was no tunnel that you had to crawl through. It was only bright daylight, and heaven was waiting, and the peace is multiplied beyond description, and Jesus was there, and we were walking into heaven together. If you folk hadn't prayed me back so soon, I might have got to sing in the choir and do a few more things, but you brought me back and loused it up. We went into surgery at 2 o'clock. We were to be out of surgery at about 3 o'clock. All this went wrong. And of course, he took us in to open heart surgery, and everything went wrong there. And we got out of surgery, I understand, just sometime past midnight. But during the hours of surgery, I came to one time, not as alert as I am now, but just enough to know that I was alive and I was still on earth. And I remember when I came to, how disappointed I was. For I'd reached a place where Paul had been. He said, I have this awful problem. I'm in a strait betwixt two. I have a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to abide in the flesh is more needful for you. But I came to once in surgery. I thought at first I was in heaven. Then I realized these folks dressed in white weren't angels. And then I saw the clock on the wall in front of me. And I thought I was in a Nazarene revival. And it was Sunday morning. And I was trying to hurry and get done and beat the Baptist to the restaurant. I was just conscious enough to pick up on the conversation and hear what was being said. And they were discussing my case. Did you ever have your case discussed? And one man said, let's face it, this man is not going to live. We've done all we can do, and he's gone. When I asked the doctors about this later, they told me that they backed up on the anesthesia and forced me into intense pain, trying to make my heart beat and trying to force me to live. Another man said his family would be better off if he didn't live. And then a lady spoke up. Of course, I knew no one, but she said, I beg you, can we go for it one more time? I've been in surgery for over 20 years. I heard her say something different about this man. I don't understand it. And she said, I beg all of you, can we just give it one more great big try and not give up on it? And then I started passing out again and going back to heaven. I asked the Lord later if he would let me meet this lady sometime. I'm having real difficulty, folks, getting through this today. Real difficult. I asked the Lord if I could somehow meet her before I got to heaven. That's not much of a favor to ask, and God loves to grant favors. And the day before I left the hospital, a lady came in dressed in all of her surgical garb, and she said, are you Mr. Hoots? And I said, yes. And she said, you weren't supposed to find this out, but I understand that you've picked up somewhere through hospital gossip that somebody pled for your life. I said, yes, I did. And she said, I'm that person. And she said, I've come to tell you bye. And she leaned down and kissed me, and the hot tears fell from her face to mine. And as she went out, I said, Lord, put her on the same block with me in heaven. Would you mind doing that? And I've got a feeling he'll answer that request too. But I've got a problem. My block is getting awful long. Now, I have no way of telling you what happened in those early days because I was unconscious for many days and don't remember. I have to rely on what the doctors tell me and what Peggy tells me and Wally and my pastor and many other people. I was in a preacher's meeting a while back where my own pastor, who was pastor at the time, told this story to the other preachers. And he was alive and well and saw it happen and talked to the doctors. And to be honest with you, it's a lot more exciting than it is to hear me tell it. After surgery, the doctors met with the family, and the heart surgeon said, I want to be honest with you. I don't want you coming to me later and saying to me, you should have told us the truth so he would have known. He said 6 minutes without a heartbeat is it, without mental damage. And Mr. Hoots has gone almost 20 minutes with total heart stoppage. Not one organ in his body functioned. He was dead for 20 minutes, totally dead. And he said, this means that that he will have brain damage. We don't anticipate his living until tomorrow. We don't think he'll live through the night. We're being honest with you. But if he were to live through the night, then if he were to live 72 hours, then he might live on after that. But if he were to live, he'll never focus his eyes or speak to you. He's totally gone mentally. And then, as you folk can see in this camp meeting, I am smarter than ever, smarter than ever, smarter than ever. The people went to prayer, I understand. My kids found them a room and prayed all night and asked the Lord to take me. They didn't want Dad left like this, so they said, please take him on tonight. The church went to prayer and begged for the Lord to keep me here. And I congratulate you in out praying him. That's one battle you won that I'm very proud of you for. A friend of ours is an RN at the hospital, and she called us some time back to tell us what I think is a very beautiful story. She said they were sitting in the dining room after this one day, eating together, some of the RNs and surgeons and so forth. And she said, the young Jewish doctor that put me to sleep during surgery, who is recognized as a very brilliant man, spoke up and said to the other doctors, I've got a shocker for you. He said, I have become a firm believer in divine healing. And one of the other doctors, sort of picking at him, said, what's brought all this on? You've been watching late night TV or something? He said, no, I mean the real thing. He said, I put a man to sleep and he died just like men die that you bury. But he said a heavenly presence filled that room that I can't put into words, and I saw him raised from the dead. And he said, so long as I live on this earth, I believe there is now a God in heaven that still intervenes in people's personal lives. My friend said, that wouldn't be Bob Hoots, would it? He said, that's his name. That's the fella. She said, he's our friend. I'm going to call him and tell him what you said. Day after day after day, I knew I was alive, and I knew I was all right mentally, but I couldn't translate it from the brain to the body. That's sort of hard to explain. That's the way it was. And I could tell by what was being said around the bed that there was thoughts that I would never know anything again. Now, they didn't just come in and stand by the bed and say, look at him, he's crazy forever. But I just picked up between words in conversations that there's a feeling I would never recognize anybody again. And day after day after day, I prayed, and I said, Lord, would you somehow be able to do something for me and get this from my brain to my lips so I can tell somebody? But day after day, I struggled with it. I've been asked by so many people, what was the first thought I had when I came to? I don't know why. I'd heard this old hymn only one time, but I remember how it touched my heart. It got into me and I couldn't get away from it. It took sleep from my eyes for many nights after I heard it. But the first thing I thought of when I came to was, am I alive or well? I wondered about the family. I didn't think of any of those things. But my first thought was the hymn that came to my mind. And when I came to, it was already there. By and by, when I've looked on his face, beautiful face, thorn-shadowed face. By and by, when I've looked on his face, I wish I'd given him more. More, more, so much more. More of my life than I ever gave before. By and by, when I've looked on his face, I wish I had given him more. The days went by. One day, my youngest one, Miriam, was standing by the bed. She'd been standing there for a long time staring at me. Everybody stared at me. And she was standing there staring at me. And she had that look that said, boy, Dad, if you could just say anything or just move any part of your body. So I prayed and I said, Lord, help me with all these tubes in my mouth. Help my lips to work. And help me to tell Miriam something. I was moving my eyes. The only part of my body that had moved were my eyes. And if you notice, they do move quite a bit anyway. And I'm not sure they ever stopped moving. But with the exception of the eyes, nothing else would work. So I looked at Miriam with my eyes and gave her that look that's worth a million words that a dad gives a kid that says, you pay me attention now because I mean business. And I gave her that kind of look, and she said, Dad, are you trying to tell me something? And she got right down in my face, and with my lips I mouthed to her, I love you. And she began to laugh and cry and jump and ran out of the intensive care, and all the nurses ran to me quickly and began to grab all the machinery and stuff. They thought I'd died. And Miriam got the rest of the family, and she said, Dad told me he loved me. But they were like the folk that was praying for Peter's release. They said she's lost her mind in her excitement here. But they came in just to console her. And then I told the entire family that I loved them. Then the heart doctor said, good sign, good sign, good sign, good sign. One day, the doctor came in, the heart doctor, and he said, Mr. Hoots, you know who I am? I said, sorta. I said, there's been so many doctors, and there were 3 doctors on the heart team, and all 3 would come together every day and stand by my bed and sort of evaluate me. But this one day, he came by himself for the first time, and he said, I am the head of the surgical team that did your heart work. And he said, there's something I don't understand. He said, since your surgery, I haven't slept very well, and my flesh won't quit crawling. And he said, I had an experience with you that I just can't handle, and I don't understand it. And he said, when you're better in a few days, I'm going to come in, and you and I are going to talk about it. One day he came in and put his hands on the side of the bed, and then the big tears just started pouring. He said, I'm sorry. I've never cried before in front of a patient. But then he said, I've never had God to raise somebody from the dead in the room I was in either. And he said, I want to ask you about what happened. He said, when you had been dead for 20 minutes. And he said, I mean dead. And he said, Mr. Hoots, don't you go out of here. Don't you leave this place and let some little 2-cent doctor or preacher talk you out of this. He said, I am so tired of preachers and doctors getting God's credit. You go out and tell folk God did it. Don't tell them I did it. Tell them that God did it. It was beyond us. But he said, when all hope was gone and we were giving up and nothing had gone, he said, nothing went right with your surgery. Nothing went right. He said, suddenly 2 hands came from somewhere. And he said, I couldn't see them, but I felt them. Just like I'd feel your hands if you shook hands with me. And he said, a beautiful presence filled the room. And then he said, those hands began to move my hands. And I was massaging your heart and sewing bypasses. And it was no longer my hands. They were hands of somewhere else that were moving my hands. And as he wept harder, he said, Mr. Hoots, what does it all mean? Where did the hands come from? I had no trouble preaching a sermon to him. Now, you talk about an American preaching a sermon to an Indian. You should have heard that sermon. I told him all about those hands and how those hands had found me and how those hands were reaching out to him and to the whole world. The hospital became like a revival place, a heaven on earth. Nurses were saved. They dubbed me the miracle man. The doctor brought other doctors in to see me. He'd always let on like they just happened to be walking down the hall and that we were friends, and he wanted them to meet me. See, I knew what was going on. He was saying, if you think he's not all right mentally, come go with me. I'll show him to you. That's what was going on. One day, he stopped in my room and he said, Mr. Hoots, these men are the heart team from the Jewish hospital across the street. They're my friends. And we were walking down the aisle talking. I just happened to think we were walking right by your door. And I said to them, would you like to meet my friend? Of course, the heart team from another hospital just happened to be walking down the hall on the 5th floor and just happened to meet me all at once. Just happened, you know. My wife, who always knows what I'm up to next, she looked at me with that look and said, if you do, I promise you, you're going to be sorry. I mean, don't you do it. Because I wanted so bad when he got around the bed, he said, this is my friend, Bob Hoots. I wanted to go, no. One of my pastor friends told me after this was over, he said, Bob, I'm not that much of a shouter. But he said, I shouted the loudest I've ever shouted when I called that hospital. He said, I tried for 2 days and nights to get in, and the phone stayed tied up at the intensive care unit. He said, I tried all hours of the morning. He said, I'll dial time after time, all through the night, and could never get in. And finally, the third day, in desperation, I just called the hospital itself. And the lady answered. I said, please, lady, don't hang up. Just give me 5 seconds here before you hang up. I am 2,000 miles away. My best friend's in the hospital, and the phone is tied up, and I can't get through. Would you tell me if Bob Hoots is alive or what is going on? And she said, yes, I'll tell you, he's still alive. He is our miracle man. God has healed him and raised him from the dead. And he said, Bob, I stood there with the phone in my hand, and I said, am I hearing what I think I'm hearing? 2,000 miles away, one of the largest hospitals in America answers me, and the lady says, he's our miracle man. The doctors say that God has raised him from the dead, and he is the miracle man of the hospital. Glory to Jesus forever. I remember one morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning, there was an extremely old black man that came in the room. He said, Mr. Hoots, are you awake or asleep? And I said, I'm awake. He said, ain't God good? He said, how come God's better to you than all the rest of us? I don't know who he was. Only time I ever saw him, I guess he might have come from heaven too. I don't know. I've discovered lately it was not far between here and there. I don't know where he came from. I said, what do you mean? He said, the rest of us are tramping down the roses on our way to heaven, but God has slowed you down, let you smell them a while. He said, ain't God good to you? I want to tell you that during all this time, there was never a dark spot in my soul. There was never a question that said why. There was never a day when I wished it hadn't happened. Every day was beautiful, and where Jesus was, it was heaven there. Bless His name. Well, before I close today, and really I don't know how long I've taken, to tell you the truth, but maybe I can sort of bring this toward a close. I want to share with you briefly some of the happiness that came out of all of this. I got a new sense of what the church is all about and what the family of God is all about. I remember saying to Peggy, she was in the room, but the doctors came in one day and they said, is your wife here? And I said, no. And they said, well, we want to talk to you. I said, we have just run the test. I don't remember the names of all of them, but it's where they put you on all kind of machines and your heart comes out on screens and they evaluate it and see how much damage you have and all this kind of stuff. They ran me through all kind of them, hour after hour, day after day. But anyway, the spokesman for the group said, Mr. Hoots, we want to tell you this in a few words. You have had the most severe heart attack, and you have the worst heart damage to be breathing of any person we've ever encountered. And this simply means that your future now is altered. You'd have to make different plans for your future altogether. Those are the words that I did not want to hear. My wife came in later, and I shared this with her. Then I thought of the house and the family and the utilities and everything else. And before I thought, I said what Brother Hancock would have said, or Wally or Nelson and the rest of you. I said, what are we going to do? Wasn't that a dumb thing to say? Did you ever say anything really dumb? Yeah, some of you fellows thinking right now when you did it, when you said, I will or I do. But Peggy said, oh, Bob, don't worry about a thing. She said, Dr. Stowe has called and said, tell you that the church you'd love to take care of you. You know, just get well. She said, Brother Middendorf has called. Brother Hancock has called. Pat Duncan has called. And if I had time, I could name several hundred more. And she said they're calling all through the day and all through the night. Several of your friends have said they're going to call every day until you get going again. And they're going to take care of you and look after you. I wish I had time to tell you all about it. I really wish I do. I think probably the best summarization was when Dr. Greathouse called me one day to talk to me. and asked me how I was getting along. We'd gotten home at the time. And he said, Bob, I've called to ask you something. And I said, what is it? And he said, would you use some real good judgment in the future in taking care of yourself? You're at a critical age, and we need you a few more years. Now, don't louse it up. You know. I don't know what he meant. Probably something like you don't close one camp meeting one day and start another the next. That's probably what he's talking about. I don't know. But anyway, this is what he called to ask me, and I'll live with it as long as I live. It's so beautiful. He said, Bob, I've preached with you a lot of times and known you a long time, and you've loved us and you've given us the best you had. I want to ask you now, when you need the church, have we loved you like you've loved us? And I said, oh, Brother Greathouse, I could never love like you've loved us. We could never love the family of God as much as the family of God has loved us. The generals, the DSs, the pastors, the evangelists, the laymen, oh, how good they were to us. 1,100 and something get well cards and letters. On and on I could go if I had time this afternoon. The things that people did for us that were so special. It seemed like it would never end. I remember a man knocking on the door one night, and he had this great big box, and he said, when you had the heart attack, he said, I put a calf in the stall and started feeding it, getting it ready for you. And he said, I butchered it, and here it is, and I brought it to you. I was driving down the toll road one day, and I said, after I got going, I said, Lord, I know surely, beyond a doubt, heaven can't think of anything else they could ever do for me. And I stopped at the toll booth, and the lady started crying. She started getting blessed. She said, aren't you Bob Hoots? And I said, yes, I am. And she said, I'm a Methodist lady, and I live in Columbia, and we prayed for you. And she said, I'm so glad to see you alive. Now, I'm going to tell you something. As long as you live, or as long as I live, can I always pay your toll for you when you come through my toll booth? One man planted a wheat field and put the evangelism field at the gate going into it, and grew me a field of wheat, took the profit, drove to Kentucky and brought it to us, had a prayer, and went his way. And I could go on by the hour, by the hour, by the hour. They send a check and write at the bottom of it, thanks for helping win my dad to the Lord. They'd write, thanks for helping me when I needed it so much. It was just like when I got saved, the Lord sent an angel with a great big book, a blank book, and he said, every mile, every tear, every sermon, every prayer, every dollar, I'll give you coupons to put in the book. You might need them some of these days. Then when it all happened, the angel brought the book back, and the Lord said, tear the coupons out, and all that you need, my people will cash them for you and take care of you. And during the 2 years, we never went 1 week without a salary, and God was so good. But enough of that. Let me tell you what it did to our ministry. My concern was that during this year that I'd be just about wiped out. But that proved to be my best year in the ministry. We saw more people won to Christ than the year of our ministry. The year that it happened. Many of them we prayed through over the phone. Many of them were our neighbors. I don't have time to share it all with you. But I discovered in this, the Lord would choose to touch our ministry and broaden our influence for Christ and holiness through what had happened in our very own life. This had a tremendous effect on my personal life. I've had 2 or 3 to tell me almost too much effect. I mean, if you don't want to be around a happy fellow, don't get around me. I remember the day they loaded him in the van, started home from the hospital. The doctor said, I guess you know you're getting out here about 2 or 3 months quicker than we had anticipated. I said, that's fine with me. But I remember the ride home, the blue sky, the birds, the flowers, the grass, the children. I remember seeing the house, the neighbors, the friends waiting. So many things that through the years had not meant very much now became the all-consuming fire in my soul. And so many things I treasured so much didn't matter anymore. This didn't matter. Let me tell you folks something. When you get to the dividing line to go to the other side, there's only two things that matter in that day. And that'd be that you have the relationship with Christ that you ought to have, and that you have brought with you all the folk you can bring with you. And that is all that matters on the great and notable day of the Lord. We walked literally in heaven's diamond mine during these days. New days of prayer, new days in His Word, new days of relationship with Christ. It had been the garden in the past, but now it's the gardener. I'd preached to minds, but now I'd preached to hearts. These were new days of thanksgiving in my soul. My family doctor called me in one day and he said, "Bob, I want to sit down and talk a while." He said, "We've never talked since all this. We want to talk a while." I said, "Oh, you're busy, Phil." I said, "This whole clinic is full." And he said, "They can wait. They've been waiting a long time anyhow." You know, doctors don't care how long you wait. In fact, they'll give you an appointment knowing they're not going to see you. But anyway, we went in his office and sat down and closed the door. Now he said, "Bob, I'm not a preacher, and I'm not all that religious, not going to claim to be." And he said, "I don't understand all this happened to you, but I understand just enough to want to talk to you about it." He said, "Let me tell you something from the medical perspective that you might ought to know." He said, "The night the news came back, the surgery was going wrong, and you weren't going to make it." He said, "My wife, who is also a specialist and a doctor, said to me, 'Phil, this is like another Vietnam to us. We can't lose Bob. We can't lose him.'" And he said 3 times we called into surgery in Louisville while he was in surgery. And 3 times we talked to the doctors. And all 3 times got the same message back. "Phil, he's just not going to make it." Now he said, "Bob, when a team of doctors tell other doctors that he's not going to make it, they just mean he can't make it. It's just that simple." And he said, "I couldn't believe it when I heard that you were grinning and talking and walking." Now he said, "I don't understand it all." But he said, "Do you remember giving me a little pocket knife one time about that long?" I said, "Well, I do now. I'd forgotten about it." He said, "When I make my rounds in the hospital, when my hand touches that knife, I just steal away in the little chapel." And he said, "I'm no expert at praying, but he said, I pray and ask God to bless my friend." And he said, "All I know is, Bob, that God has spared your life and trusted you to touch other lives with this." And he said, "You're doing a good job at it, and I want you to keep it up." He said, "Stay humble with it. Keep a good spirit with it, but share with others what the Lord has done in your life." I remember after having the car accident 1 year later, I was in surgery 1 week to a year later. And this arm, this side over here was paralyzed, and I went in for neurosurgery and orthopedic surgery. They got me all ready for surgery. They said, "Tomorrow's the day. We'll get it over with." I said, "Good." I was lying in the bed, and they wouldn't allow me to move, just had to lie there still, and that's tough for me to do. And I said, "Let's get it over with." And then later the day, the neurosurgeon came in, and he said, "Mr. Hoots, we picked up on your records. You've had some heart work done and quite a traumatic experience." And I said, "Yes, that's true." And he said, "Well, we're going to hold up." He said, "We don't want to run into risk." But he said, "I'm going to find the best cardiologist I can find around here, and I want him to check you out before we take you to surgery." They brought him in, very wonderful person. He ran some tests, checked us out, and said he can't go. His heart's not up to it. Later, they got ready again, all ready to take me to surgery. And the heart doctor stopped him again and said, "He's not ready. He can't go." 7 times they got me ready for surgery, all built up emotionally. And the 7th time I finally made it. And on the 7th round, the heart doctor said, "You can go with him today." After the 6th put off, my daughter came in one day, Lydia. She just bounces and gabs and runs and jumps. She's born that way, and she's never quit. And she thought she was God's appointed one to keep me cheered up. So she'd come in the room and tell the latest joke I'd already heard 1,000 times. She'd bring some kind of little flower, something cute she'd picked up and say, "How you doing, Dad?" And I knew right then I was a lot better off about the whole thing than she was. She came in this particular day after they'd put me off the 6th time. And I said, "Lydia, has somebody told you that your dad is discouraged or something? Why are you trying to cheer me up? Looks to me like I'm doing fine." She just grabbed her head and just started screaming and crying and fell over in the chair. And she said, "Dad, bear with me. I can't take any more." She said, "I have had all I can stand." And she said, "You got through the other deal, and now they've told us that there's a possibility of you being paralyzed even after the surgery, and it's such a risky surgery." And she said, "Dad, I've just had all I can stand." And I said, "Now, wait a minute, Lydia." I said, "Let Dad preach to you a minute." I said, "You've heard your dad preach about Job and all that happened to him." I said, "Now, I feel like Job. No matter what may happen to me, if God will grant me 2 requests, I'll get through this just fine." I said, "Lydia, I've just been reading about it. When everything had happened to Job, Job just said, 'Lord, just work it out however you want to work it out, but just grant me 2 requests. There's 2 things I can't get along without. I got to have these 2 things." He said, "Lord, in heaven, let not thy great dread make me afraid." And then he said, "Take not thy presence away from me." And I said, "Lydia, if we can be father and son, if I can love him like a father and not be afraid of him and know that he's doing it all in love, and then if he will fill this room with his presence, then it'll be all right. We will get through the rest. Glory be to God forevermore." Well, I'm alive, I think. For weeks after I got home, I'd have Peggy to get the mirror and leave it, and I'd feel it myself and look in the mirror and try to talk myself into being alive. But I'm finally convinced myself that I really am. I've had just enough glimpse of heaven to beg you not to miss it. And believe me today, one moment there, only one moment, Brother Wooten, one moment is worth 10 million lives of service. I beg you, you'll soon be crossing the line of worlds. It won't matter then whether you're popular or unpopular, got money or you don't have money. It don't matter then whether you're a success or not a success. So many things that mean so much to you is not going to matter anymore. How much your retirement was is not going to matter anymore. There'll just be one thing going to matter. Are you ready? Are you ready to go? In your heart, are you ready to go? And all through these months, when I was home and couldn't get out of bed for so long, I sang it over and over and over again. By and by, I wish I had given him more. Come, Wally and Ginger, and help me sing a verse of it, will you?